I will show a quick video just of some core work. Some of this overlaps with what Lee's shown in the earlier stages. Ideally, this stuff has been addressed in mid-stage, but I've often found that people arrive in late-stage rehab and they haven't done much core work. They haven't done much corrective work. There's often been a focus on the quads and the hamstrings. And so sometimes you need to have a little bit of core control work in there as well. So here's just a tiny video just around some corrective core work. I also feel that this needs to be continued when they're back playing as well and regularly done. Not necessarily as part of a warm-up, but definitely microdose during the week. But yeah, for me, most of that is mid-stage rehab, earlier rehab, but it's also just making sure that we are continuing that core work. And then what we need to do is to make sure our movement is a little bit more focused around the late stage. So the next video is just going to be on more kind of late stage movement prep. And what this video is going to show is an example of someone displaying poor movement patterns, what we determine as poor movement patterns for an ACL. And then kind of a focus on assessing this and restoring this as part of our approach, trying to achieve good movement patterns prior to them heading outside for their sport-specific training. Cool. And then, yeah, after that, we'd kind of head through to the sport-specific retraining as well. But any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've probably got to remind the practitioners there's a lot of things going on parallel at this stage.
Yeah.
So like you've said, the core conditioning might be still going on. They're probably still touching base with their strength training as well as this. Yeah. And again, what the emphasis seems to sometimes be, if people aren't concentrating, is everything else goes, and it's the field because it's become quite sexy and it's moving. So I guess my thought here is to remember that we're not talking about it. There will be strength going on in parallel. There will be core going on in parallel at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And if you can integrate them at the same time, you can make programs a bit more efficient. And I think sometimes the movement aspects, like my feeling is if your movement training is both for motor learning and for neuromuscular adaptations as well. So if you do plyometric training, part of it's for making you stronger. We know if you do plyometric training, you can still improve max strength, but you can improve power, rate of force development, and movement control at the same time. And so, yeah, it's just making sure you're doing all that. But sometimes plyometric training is not the best way to get those people stronger. So you also need your high force stuff alongside. So this is where, your strength work, which is going to include higher intensities in the late stage. So when you transition into late stage, you're probably going to move away from your 8 to 12 repetition maximums. You're probably going to start to do your 5-6 repetition maximums. You're going to have some heavy eccentric training in there. You're going to have more functional strength training as well.
Yeah, and there's probably that being really aware of how microdosing might work here, because you could have an interference effect. If you're doing heavy load work a few times a week, there's going to be a consequence against your movement skill.
Yeah.
There's going to be a carryover fatigue. So it might be, what's the minimum I can get away with to keep this moving along?
Yeah.
And where do I place it in the week so I don't get interference effects?
Yeah.
And then depending on what they're going back to, consider then, do you bring it in at the wrong time of the week later on. So you are having these interference effects. So they've got to deal with fatigue and deal with sore muscles and all the rest of it. So there's a little bit of thought needs to go in how you plan the week, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And it depends. I mean, for me, the planning process is, if you've got a professional athlete, the good and bad with professional athletes is you've got a lot of time, which means you can do everything. But then you've got to have more thought, which is said, in how you plan that microcycle. Well, we always say microcycle, mesocycle. It's more just how you plan that stage and what you're doing within that week. And most of the time with professionals, I'll probably work to a 2-day on, 1-day recovery day, and then a 2-day on. So they'll probably do their movement prep work in the morning, then they'll do a heavier strength session in the afternoon, and you're kind of doing double session with most of your professionals. But if you're working with an amateur level football player, they're probably doing one strength session, maybe one corrective movement session a week, and then they might be doing some stuff that's home prescribed as well. So doing their conditioning work, doing their core work. So it's just knowing who's in front of you. But I do think you need to make sure there's enough focus on movement, there's enough focus on strength and power, but they're also doing the conditioning work alongside that as well. So that's not going to give any cardiovascular stimulus. They should be doing some bike-based off-feet conditioning. And that's
part of the contracting with the athlete.
Yeah.
It is like, well, I can only see you once a week. You've got an aspiration. Yeah. If you're not achieving these goals, it's going to be longer because we will get some cardiovascular stimulus with you doing plyo work because you're not that fit. Yeah. But that's going to end quite quickly, and it's still not prepping you for the game. And it's probably that awareness to them of all the components they need. Yeah. And the fact they've got to commit to the process a little bit as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think, as you said, just setting the goals, making the patient aware of what they need to achieve, and probably cardiovascular fitness for an amateur level is not going to be the same as a professional. If you let the conditioning drop as a professional, then that's going to take a lot of time back. And they invest so much time in getting themselves fit. It's so essential.
But sometimes the athlete's face is dropping. It's like, well, you can go and do a HIIT session at the local gym on a bike. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. You don't have to go and do box to box on your own. Yeah. Drills. There's alternates for them to do. I think sometimes being creative with how those other sessions look to maintain some degree of motivation is quite important. Yeah. Because what you don't want is them dropping that. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, rehab's grueling, isn't it? It's not, like athletes should be exhausted. It should be the hardest they've ever worked. And it should actually get easier when they go back with the team. And rehab is it's challenging on a motivational level. It's the old adage, train hard, play easy.
Yeah. So, but as you said, it's always making sure that you're doing enough in those areas. And the mistakes I generally see are that there's an over focus on one thing. So it could be that, we're so obsessed with hitting a certain quad marker that we don't do any, we do very little movement work. And it might actually be that, just a different stimulus is going to help you get to that point anyway. But it's just balancing all of those factors, and then fundamentally making sure they're ready for the field is you've got certain criteria in place that you want to hit, but really it's just making sure if they're moving well, they've got good load acceptance, they're strong enough, and the movement patterns are solid, they should be fine to start transitioning to the field. But it's also making sure you've got a good on-field rehab process in place. And I think it depends. I've always found it depends. The transition to on-field rehab is, do you have the setup? And sometimes different countries have, insurance where they're allowed to do stuff in clinic, but they're not insured for doing anything outside the clinic as well. And I think on-field rehab is just the key area that's just under neglected in this field at the moment. But it's very much context dependent as well. So what I'm going to do now is just show you an on-field rehab process. So as part of my work, I've published some on-field rehab frameworks. So it's a 5-staged on-field program. It's based on 4 pillars of activity, which is movement quality, fitness conditioning, load, and technical based aspects. But what I'm going to do is just show you 4 different videos of the different stages, and then we can chat and discuss through them as well. Yeah, so there's kind of videos of on-field rehab. Obviously, it's not everything you can do. It's just an example of different components of it. So there's bits in there around controlled linear, controlled lateral movement drills. Then there's a progression towards change of direction activities, early introduction of basic technical actions. Then we kind of progress to more reactive movement training, so kind of reactive cutting. And then there's kind of gradual increase in decision making and cognition as well. But yeah, the videos are kind of just an example of how to kind of structure and progress it as well. Any questions from you?
I think it's important. It's a really good structure, regardless of any of the team court-based sports or field-based sports. You can take that into a netball, a basketball, a hockey, a rugby. Equally well, you've just got to think about what the nature of the running looks like within those sports, and then the reactive decision making. So I think it's really important. You're not reinventing the wheel for another sport.
Yes.
The wheel's there. You've just got to look at the sort of like tread you got on the tires.
Yeah.
And then just change it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to get across. If you've got the process in your head, you're not making that many adjustments in reality for different things. Because again, you get a scenario, you're working in a private practice, it's like, I'm used to dealing with football, how am I going to deal with this netball player? Well, actually, it's have the strong process, and then if you are in a clinic, discuss, this is what it looks like in football. What would that look like for you in netball? What would that look like for you in rugby? Yeah. I think there is have the conversation once you've got the structure.
Yeah, definitely. And you said that it's sometimes involving the athlete as well. So sometimes I felt not uncomfortable working with certain sports, but I felt that I want to make it look and feel more closer to their sports. I've just asked them to say, right, here's what I normally do with this type of player. Like, how can we make this feel more like something you should do? So particularly when I've worked with rugby players, I've just gone, right, here's what I would do. How can we change this up? And most of the time, they're just happy. You touched on autonomy previously, but it's probably no better place to introduce autonomy than letting them design the exposure that they're doing. Or, as you said, you can bring in a coach. But I think it depends what environment you're working with. In football, normally you'll have maybe a physio that's doing the on-field rehab, and they'll bring a coach in. But ideally, if you're able to, my feeling is if you know all of these like pillars well, you know about movement, you know about technical training, and you don't have to be the best coach in the world, but if you're in a level 2 qualified football coach, you know how to do skills,